Welcome back. WW Fly Corvair here. Today's topic, oil change. We're going to take you through step by step on the oil change and show you all the procedures to a complete and thorough oil change, which is also something of an inspection. So let's go ahead and take a look at it. First step is that we're going to tie the airplane down with chains on the tail hook. On the mains, we're going to have blocks, and we're also going to have a pilot at the controls. What we're doing today is we're going to warm the engine up. So after the airplane's secured, we're going to warm it up to operational temperature and get that oil flowing inside the plane. One of the good things about Corvair cowlings is you can open them up and take a good look at the whole motor. After warming up the engine to an operational temperature, you can open up the cowling and begin changing the oil. You're going to drain the oil out, and I always prefer a white bucket. A white clean bucket allows you to see what's coming out in the oil. When you're draining it out in the oil, you're going to get an oil sample in the small plastic bottle. We'll talk about that some later on, but this is for oil analysis, and you get it halfway through the oil drain. When the oil's put about 2 quarts in the bottom, you take a sample and then you cap it off. But as you are draining the oil, you're going to take this opportunity to give everything under the cowling a good look. Previously, we've talked about inspections and the frequency of oil changes, particularly early on. Early on, when the engine's new and you're going through the 40-hour test phase, you don't want to be ignoring the engine or just looking through an oil port or just checking the level. You want to use the opportunity of changing the oil to study everything on your installation. You want to look at those throttle linkage connections. You want to study the exhaust system and make sure you got the gaskets in and they're sealed up tight. You want to check the torque on a lot of different bolts. The oil change just provides the event where you take care of all of these things. Make sure you don't miss the opportunity. You do this with good lighting when you're rested, sitting in a chair. You're not rushing through this. It's an inspection. The next step is to change the filter. The filter is on the back of the motor in this position. Although it looks a little crowded, it's actually very accessible because it's a small filter. We can unscrew the filter directly off the back of the motor, and we'll screw another one on in its place. The popular filter is the K&N, but we also use the Mobil M1 108A. One of the features of the K&N filter is the square 1-inch nut on the back. Many people make the mistake of installing the filter by spinning it on with this nut. That's an absolute no-no. That nut, if you apply torque to it, can break the spot welds and cause a tiny leak in the back. So only use for removal. For installation, your bare hand is perfectly fine. You can safety wire the oil filter. The K&N has holes in the nut on the back, which can be safety wired to the mounting bolts for the sandwich adapter. The 108 does not have a safety wire feature, but you can put a clamp on this and safety wire the clamp. If you choose to use an oil filter without a natural spot for safety wire, you got to put a clamp on it and you got to safety wire it off. You can use a hose clamp, and people have done it for years, but I would much prefer that you use an Adel style clamp. Put it around it, put a bolt through it, tighten it up, and safety wire it. It's abrasion resistance on the oil filter body itself. The 5 quarts of oil are put in through the valve cover port. One of the things to always do when you've got it all buttoned back up is to check the level of the dipstick. May sound dumb because you just put the oil in, but no kidding, this is a 1-gallon container. We've actually had somebody buy a 2.5-gallon container and put 10 quarts in the motor. So, pays to check the dipstick. Takes only a second. Don't forget to put the ZDDP in, along with the rest of the oil. Second to last step, go outside and run the engine. Button the whole thing up and bring the oil to complete running operable temperature. You want to run the engine up to RPM, you want to make sure it's good, and you want to check it out, and then you're going to open up the cowling and take a look, check the level, you want to make sure there are no leaks, and you want to get one last good look at everything under the cowling. Last step, logbook entry. I brought this out just to give you a good look. Want to see an interesting historical logbook? Here's one from 1966. And of course, it's a Corvair powered airplane. Talking about a test run, operations, and notice it was done in Honolulu, Hawaii. We'll bring that right up there. Honolulu, Hawaii was where that was done. Notice everything in the logbooks covers all the operations of the airplane very carefully. Flight ops and maintenance covered in a traditional logbook. You want to have entries on all of your stuff like this. It's really important. Let me give you one other thing about logbooks. You take a look at this. If you don't have a repairman certificate for your airplane, an A&P mechanic is going to have to do your condition inspection at the end of the year. A&P mechanic comes along and sees that you've been working on the airplane but not putting it in the logs. Under those circumstances, I would never do an inspection on that person's airplane. Airplanes that have unlogged maintenance on it leave the last guy who signs the logbook in a lurch. Most guys are smart enough not to touch that with a 10-foot pole. If I walk up to an airplane and I can see the oil filter's been changed on it, but of course it wasn't entered into the logs, not touching that airplane, not working with that guy. Most mechanics are smart like that. Here we are looking at oil filters and oil filter cutters. This is right out of the Aircraft Spruce catalog. This is a KRC. What number is it?
1203.
1203. $65 tool. It is a requirement. It is the only tool that will cut the small diameter filters. All you have to do is put the filter on there and you tighten the screw, make about 4 revolutions, and just like you're opening a can, good, it'll cut right through the top and open up the filter and allow you to take the contents out and see the inside. Funny side note, stupid stuff from the internet. There's a guy on the internet who has about 500,000 views, automotive mechanic, trying to tell everybody how bad Fram filters are, and he's an expert in evaluating filters, except he doesn't own a filter cutter. Claims all this stuff, knows this stuff, but this was the tool that he used in the video to open a filter. If a guy opens a filter with this because he doesn't own an oil filter wrench, he shouldn't be on the internet offering advice about oil filters. If you own an oil filter cutter, you can cut things apart and you can take a look. Fram may or may not be a good filter. I don't particularly use them on flight engines. But I'll tell you, I've opened hundreds and hundreds of oil filters over the years using a proper cutter. But a guy who's using a grinder like this, that's a joke on the internet. These are the component parts hiding inside right after you open it up. You're going to take a razor blade and put a slit in the material all the way around and then pull it out with pliers. Here's the paper from the inside of the oil filter. You're going to get a good light out and a magnifying glass and maybe a magnet, and you're going to take a look for particles in here. If you see a lot of metal, obviously something's wrong. But what you're really doing here is you're trend monitoring. You're taking a look at it to see over time and break-in of your motor that there's less and less and less stuff in the filter. That's what you're looking at. That's what consistency is about. Okay, let me give you insider aircraft mechanic sense of humor. One of the things mechanics always talk about is you take a look inside somebody's filter, and the guy owns a Bonanza, and he's a hedge fund manager, and you find one little flake of metal in there. And the guy says, "Is that bad?" And you say, "For the love of God, your kid's flying this airplane, mister. What kind of monster are you?" Same mechanic, his own Super Cub. He's got it. It looks like the grinder was working inside. And his friends say, "Hey, that looks like a lot of metal." And he says, "I don't think so. Did you see anything with a serial number on it?" "Well, not a whole serial number anyway." So there's a lot of variation in what people think of as too much metal. But again, it's a trend monitoring thing. Okay, your next oil change is a couple of months away. How are you seriously going to remember how much stuff was in it? Well, here's how I've always done it. You seal it in a plastic bag after you inspect it carefully. Got this? You date it with a Sharpie, you hang it up on the wall, and next time, if you want a reminder of how much metal was in it or what it looked like, you simply go right back up to the wall, get them both down, and look at them through the plastic and compare. It's an easy way of looking at it and understanding. You can also take a digital camera and take really close pictures of it if you want to preserve it that way also. Okay, that's the traditional methodology, and I like it, but there's something every Corvair flyer needs to be doing also, and that's oil analysis. You saw during the oil change, we took a sample of the oil. This is the modern way of doing it. Your oil sample is going to be sent off to LNC Labs. This little kit is what you get from Larry. You buy the kit for $15 and you mail it in, and he comes back with a report on what your trend is doing, but also a comparison to a fleet of other Corvair powered airplanes. They're both very useful tools. I do both on all engines. But if you look at it realistically, this would be a stethoscope and this is a CAT scan. He's looking at stuff in parts per million on this. This is going to spot any trouble that you're having long before this will. You got to keep that in mind and utilize this system. If you're not doing this, you're not really managing your risk very well. You got a lot of time in this engine. You want to know what's going on in it. The best feeling in the world is getting a good report back from Larry on this. You get a good report back, it adds a lot of confidence. A lot more confidence than looking at this. We'll have a complete video on oil analysis a little bit later, but for right now, check it out. It's an important program for you to be a part of. Last step in your oil change. Take your airplane out and fly it. This is done solo. I know of no aircraft mechanic worth a damn that takes an airplane fresh out of maintenance and puts a passenger in it. Even if it's a couple trips around the pattern, it's done solo. Make sure you do it this way. Thanks very much. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe.